Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. So I'm originally from Costa Rica and currently based out of Costa Rica. I work part-time with the Peruvian office and still work part-time with WWF International. I focus on marine species conservation, particularly turtles and cetaceans, so whales, dolphins, and porpoises, for the international component of my work, and on the main threat that these species face, which is bycatch, which kills 600,000 marine mammals a year, hundreds of thousands of marine turtles, and millions of sharks every year. But today I'm going to talk to you more about the work that we're doing in Peru, where we're focused on fisheries. So I don't know how aware you are about the situation with Peruvian fisheries, if I can get this to work. There we go. But I want to start with the personal side of things. In my experience in working in conservation, it really is about the people that you work with. And that's why I think it doesn't really matter if you work for industry, public sector, or non-governmental organizations. It's all about the relationships that you build. And one of the mistakes that has been made by many conservationists, and we still make today, is the fact of going to a place, getting the information you need, and then leaving and forgetting about it. When it's actually the people that stay behind and the communities that work in these places that really have that long-term relationship with our conservation targets. So my point with that is that I think sometimes we focus too much on our conservation targets and not enough on the people involved. So in that sense, I want to introduce you to Carlos Bayona. Carlos is 42 years old. He has 3 children. He lives in a place called Paita in Piura in northern Peru. And he is the president of one of the 2 existing cooperatives, which is a governmental pilot program. And he started fishing when he was 8. And he has been a fisheries captain since he's 17. And now he's owner of a few fishing boats. And we'll talk more about him later. But sometimes it's nice to know who we're talking about and the people that we need to relate to. So putting things into context, and particularly in terms of Peruvian fisheries, in Peru, one of the reasons I really like working there is mainly 2. One, in terms of bycatch. It's one of the global hotspots for bycatch for both turtles and cetaceans, recognized by both the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN's specialist groups, but also by the International Whaling Commission, among other organizations. And it also has some of the biggest fisheries of the world. In fact, it has the biggest monospecific industrial fishery, which is the anchoveta fishery that provides a lot of the omega-3 and fish feed that is used around the world. But I'm not going to focus on that fishery, which is where most of the attention is focused on, but talk to you more about the artisanal fisheries, which are also huge. And with the challenge that in Peru, there's very limited fisheries governance. So most of these fisheries operate in informality. And that's a bit about what we're going to discuss today. So it's a bit of a reality check of the context of some of the field locations where we want to get involved in when we're working in conservation. So in that sense, first of all, the latest fisheries census that was done in the country dates back 7 years, which says a lot about the fisheries management of the country, of course. So back then, the census reported that there were 44,000 artisanal fisheries and about 16,000 fishing vessels. And as you can see in the picture, we're not talking about small pangas like the boats you see in the front of the picture, but we're talking about significant vessels. And in that sense, one of the interesting things of the case of Peru is that artisanal fisheries aren't clearly defined. So in some countries, artisanal fisheries are these small pangas. In the case of Peru, we're talking about some 15-meter long, 12 tons of storage vessels. But still, where the operation is manual and it's carried out by the local communities. And according to the census in 2012, 62% of that fishery operates in informality, which is a nice way of saying illegality. Not out of their will, but out of lack of governance. So The reason why Peru has such rich fisheries is because it has a rich ocean. And the reason why it has so much bycatch as well is because of the rich ocean that also attracts these fisheries. It attracts many of the marine species, and that encounter between the fisheries and non-target species is what causes the incidental take or accidental take of protected species in many cases. And so you can see that the country has over 750 species of fish. It has over 30 species of cetaceans. It has 5 out of the 7 marine turtle species in the world. And it has 3,000 kilometers of coastline. So fisheries in Peru is hugely important for the economy of the country. And as I was saying, the anchoveta fishery is the most important fishery in the country, and so it's the one that attracts the most attention and has the best analysis and science supporting it and governance around it. The 2 second most important fisheries are the giant squid or pota fishery and the perico or mahi-mahi fisheries, which are the ones that I'm going to focus on in our discussions today, and is also the main fisheries that we're focusing on in our work in Peru as WWF. So the giant squid fishery has about 3,000 fishing vessels dedicated to this activity. It has 11,000 fishers working in this fishery, and in terms of the quantity of product or giant squid that is removed from the ocean every year, it's 514,000 tons reported in 2015, and $405 million in exports that this fishery generates. So again, even though it's an artisanal fishery, it actually has a huge amount of exports. In the case of giant squid, mainly to Japan. So giant squid is not the typical squid you eat in calamares. It's really not locally consumed in Peru either. It's mostly used for export and mostly sent to Asia. And it's very hard to get a perspective of what this fishery is like. So for that reason, we actually sent a videographer on a fishing trip with some artisanal fishers last year. And they did this documentary I'm going to show you next. And the reason why we reproduce, it's a 3-minute video, this short video, is because for many of the authorities that govern these fisheries, they're not so aware of how the fishery works either. So this was a great opportunity to show them what life at sea is actually like.
El mar significa para mí casi la mayor parte de mi tiempo, puedo decir así. Mi otro hogar, porque me encuentro también con mi otra familia, que son mis compañeros. Estamos en Pucusana, somos de la embarcación Elía 2, de la cooperativa Jehová es mi pastor de la Tortuga. Y vamos esta vez a la pesca de la pota. La tripulación es de diferentes lugares, entonces acá nos hacemos uno solo, convivimos y prácticamente somos como hermanos, como una familia. Y somos compañeros, entre nosotros nos ayudamos. Y esta vez vamos a salir así bien unidos a buscar la pota. Cada uno tiene su puesto, empezando por el capitán, que es el encargado de buscar la pesca. Luego están los bodegueros, que se encargan de congelar la pesca de la pota acá en alta mar. Y luego están los marineros y por último el cocinero, que es el encargado de preparar los alimentos para cada uno de nosotros. Y también en el momento de trabajar él tiene su puesto, que es del viscerador. La pesca está de un lugar en otro. Por eso es que a veces demoramos de 10, 12 hasta 15 días. Esta vez no encontramos los 2 primeros días. Felizmente nuestros compañeros o amigos del capitán le comunicaron que en tal coordenadas como es 810, 8030, ahí estaba la pesca de la pota y habían varias embarcaciones. Entonces tuvimos que navegar 3 días para poder llegar y ahí entonces estamos chambeando. Y nosotros extraemos la pota por medio de una herramienta que le llamamos muestra potera, que al momento de coger el casquito fosforescente, entonces se atrapa ahí con las puntas de acero y es ahí donde nosotros entonces comenzamos a jalar y de esa forma nosotros cazamos la pesca de la pota. Si nosotros venimos a depredar, por ejemplo, o a matar pequeñas especies, de repente mañana más tarde ya no vamos a poder tener una fuente de trabajo como en este caso el recurso del pota. Yo creo que es importante respetar los recursos porque vamos a proteger la pesca, vamos a proteger el mar.
¡Nos vamos a puerto!
Es nuestra fuente de trabajo en la cual nosotros con esto sustentamos la familia, hay marineros que tienen sus hijos, su familia y por ello salen a buscar el pan. Así es nuestro día a día.
Okay, so to talk to you about the third most important fishery of Peru, which is the mahi-mahi fishery, which is locally known as perico or dorado in other countries in the region. The main export market of this fishery is the US, and local consumption is increasing, but it's not that common as of yet. So there's 2,000 vessels dedicated to this fishery. Nonetheless, less fisher folk than in the case of the giant squid. So we're talking about around 4,000 fishers. And in 2015, exports represented 61,000 tons. And the value of these exports were $95 million. So that's the amount of money a year that this fishery alone represents. Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you a bit about formalization, and I'm always a bit unsure if this is the right term in English, but what it means is basically the lack of fisheries governance or formalizing of these fisheries, because most of these fishers operate in illegality, as I was saying, not because they're doing illegal activities, but because they don't have a fishing permit and their vessels don't have licenses. Registration licenses. And this links to actually the issue of deforestation, because these vessels are mainly made out of wood. And so, starting to respond a bit to your question, say I'm a fisherwoman and the daughter of a fisherman who wants to get into the family business. And so I need a fishing vessel. And these boats are not cheap. They cost about $100,000 each. I, of course, don't have that money in the bank, as most of us don't. So I will go to a middleman. And a middleman will say, I'll loan you the money so you can build your vessel, which is legal. Because as you can see on screen, since 2006, they started making illegal the construction of these vessels. And first, from the biggest vessels of over 10 square meters of storage, then to 5 square meters in 2010, and then there was a definite prohibition of construction of any fishing vessel since 2015. Nonetheless, if you drive around, particularly the northern coast of Peru, where most of the fisheries are concentrated, you're going to see these illegal shipyards throughout the country. So, as you say in Spanish, a vista y paciencia, so everybody can see, which shows that there's no control. And the reason for that is because even though this legislation exists, it doesn't have sanctions associated to it. And this is one of the main challenges that we face. And as WWF, we actually presented a comment to the legislative power at the end of last year about this, about the need for sanctions for this activity that has been declared illegal, but there isn't real action taken. And so in this photograph where you can see policemen around the area is an actual exception, let's say, to the rule. So because these fishing vessels are made out of wood, this wood comes from illegal logging, which is linked, therefore, to deforestation of the jungle and even the Amazon forest in Peru. So again, linked to another conservation issue. And so again, say I then ask you for a loan of $100,000 and we build this beautiful fishing vessel. And your conditions are, I of course not only have to pay you the loan, but I have to sell you my product for the X amount of years, 15, 20 years, until I pay up my loan, where you decide the interest rate and you decide how much you pay me for the fishing product. Additional to that, I will buy from you the fuel and ice I need, because these fisheries, they take ice in their storage, and hence also their time of fishing is limited by how long the ice lasts. And one of the problems they face with their exports, where a high percentage of the exports, sometimes as high as 20% of the exports, is rejected by the final market, particularly by the US, is because the product is not in good enough quality by the time it reaches final destination. And any delays at port will affect the quality of the product as well. So there's sanitary issues associated to this. So I don't get any kind of receipt from this interaction between us. There is no contract. There's just a question of word. And all that is the way these fisheries traditionally operate in Peru. And that will link very much to the challenges of what they face in terms of the requirements that are coming up. So the first attempt of the government of legalizing these fisheries happened in 2016, which a legislation known as CIFORPA 1. And basically what was proposed at the time is that I, again, have my new beautiful fishing vessel. I go online, I fill out a form, and poof, I print out my fishing permit. Voila, I'm legal. Of course, this was not a great system, because on one hand, you're still promoting illegality, because there was no fiscalization or visual control of actually, is this vessel I'm registering, does it actually exist? Is it under my name? Like all these things that really require to make measures and make sure measures are in place. So that didn't go so well, and therefore the government thought, well, let's try these pilot projects and see if we can try a different model, which is the cooperative model, which we as WWF have been involved in for the last 5 years, and I'll talk a bit more about in a minute. The problem with the cooperative model is that they face much more stringent restrictions and requirements to be legal, while at the same time you have these other regulations that are much more flexible. So there's a lack of motivation as to why would they be in a cooperative if they have more requirements, and if they just go online and register themselves, they don't have to meet all these requirements, which I'll be talking about in a minute. To make matters worse, in 2018, the government, again with the desire to try to take a better control of these fisheries, and they keep trying to do this, well, we need to legalize this, so let's do this, one opening up of registering all the vessels, and then we close it down. But by the problem they close it, there's new fishing vessels in place and so on, and so they say it's the last chance, but then they go through another effort of opening it up again. And because of the lack of fiscalization or verification of the fishing vessels, the system just isn't working really well. So in that sense, that's the sort of legal context that we're working in. So to give the example of the cooperative specifically, which is quite an interesting case. So first of all, there's two cooperatives under the government's pilot program. One is La Islilla, and the other is La Tortuga. So I was telling you about our friend Carlos, who is the director of one of these cooperatives. And then the man that is standing up in the picture, his name is Manuel, and he's the president of the other cooperative. So in terms of the importance of these pilot projects, before I tell you more, I'm going to show you a short video that says it's better than I ever will.
La cooperativa llega en un momento cuando nosotros estábamos, como se dice, en nada, ¿no? Porque no podíamos llegar a ser formales. Hemos sabido que en el camino van a haber muchas cosas que nos van a querer tumbar, pero hay que perseverar, ser perseverantes y darle para adelante, ¿no?
Luego de 4 a 5 años de discusiones acerca del proceso de formalización, se ha identificado una alternativa para poder formalizar embarcaciones pesqueras de perico y pota. Hemos colaborado con el gobierno en los últimos años y actualmente están próximos a formalizarse aproximadamente 600 barcos, lo cual además va a beneficiar a 350 armadores pesqueros de estas dos comunidades.
Para nosotros la cooperativa lo tenemos bien en claro, que es una asociatividad empresarial.
Es una buena manera de luchar contra la informalidad porque de manera asociada se obtienen mayores beneficios. Los dirigentes se han dado cuenta de que ya ellos podían hacerse cargo de toda la cadena de valor, beneficio de los socios directamente y de sus familias.
Lo que queremos es ser exportadores de nuestros propios productos.
Eso es lo que buscamos nosotros, generar nuestros propios puestos de trabajo para nuestros propios hijos.
Ya nuestros productos no sean made in España, made in Chile, ya sea made in Perú, o por qué no decirlo de nuestra caleta La Islilla.
No fue una etapa fácil para lograr esto. Me gustaría que mis hermanos pescadores de Paita, de todo el Perú, logren esta formalización.
Okay, so the government decided that they wanted to try out this fisheries cooperative model. And the incentive for the fishers was that they were going to get their legal permits to fish. But we also saw that there were many other benefits being part of a cooperative, and that's what we wanted to emphasize. This is not only about getting your fishing permit, but it's also about you seeing the financial benefits that working collaboratively can bring you. And the interesting thing about La Islilla and La Tortuga, which is also the reason why we need to keep that people perspective always in mind, is that they're two quite religious communities. They're very Christian, and that is something that unites them. And those values is what helps them being open to cooperate, where most of the other fishers in fishing associations are not willing to be part of cooperatives because there's a high level of distrust associated to their activity and the people that might be part of the directives of the cooperatives. Also, something important about the cooperative process is that there was a huge push from the governments, therefore, to focus on this cooperative model and provide the incentives to the fishers. But with the governmental changes in Peru, which are quite frequent, the people in charge changed positions, and the government interest in this cooperative model kept reducing and reducing until now there's only one person in place that still supports the cooperative model. So you have this huge effort that went into place not only by the governments but actually by the fishers themselves that now is sort of left hanging to a certain extent, which is also limiting the capacity of the fishers to meet the requirements. So the requirements the fishers have under the cooperative model is that 25% of all their catch should be sold to the cooperative. With the idea is that then the cooperative takes this 25% from all their members and sells it at a better price. So this should provide a benefit to the community. Some of the other benefits that the members of the cooperatives can get, for example, is buying gasoline together, because by coming together they could also get better prices. And these are the kind of things that we've been trying to promote to them so they see that this is something that could work for them even beyond the fishing permits themselves. Another requirement is that they need to disembark in authorized fishing ports. And this is because actually a lot of the disembarkment goes into illegal fishing ports or ones that aren't authorized by the government, which means that there is no control at the point of disembarkment, and hence, the informal system continues. Additional to that is that these fishing vessels should be using satellite tracking. And there is a CISASAT is the name of the system that the government uses, which is asking fishers to implement to know where their fishing vessels is, which again would help with the safety measures that these fisheries require. And finally, the registration of captures in electronic systems is something that is being required to the cooperatives. So if you look at this, I mean, it's quite a lot. And again, if you think about the CIFORPA 1 or CIFORPA 2, they aren't required any of this. So to look at this in more detail, first of all, they need to have an internal regulation, let's say, so kind of standards that they need to meet, an agreement of how this cooperative works. They need to have an accounting system, which, as I mentioned, based on the example of me using him as an intermediary and selling to him and having no paperwork to support that, makes the accounting of this very, very difficult. Then having this electronic system to register captures, which is something that we're working on, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. The selling 25% of the product to the cooperative, the disembarking in legal ports, and to have your appropriate sanitation permit as well, which is really important, and the registration of your vessel and the satellite tracking. And these are the timelines that were given to the fishers. So the permits were given in June of last year, and they had 3 months, 6 months, 12 months to meet these requirements. Barely any of these requirements have been met. Some fishers are already participating in some of these systems. So what the government is doing is giving them more and more time with the hope that they will be able to meet this requirement. But as I was saying, with the lack of current government support, it's very difficult for these fishers to move more forward. And because they're used to working in this informal system, that has been seen in the process too. So for example, there are delays to get some inspectors to the site, and then so some phone calls are made, and let's say bilateral system is put in place to be able to make those steps happen, which is by far not the ideal of what the intention was to start with. Nonetheless, we have been working with these cooperatives for 5 years, as I was saying, and we've been helping them set up these statutes, helping them define their business model. In the picture, you're not able to see him, but the man that is standing in the back beyond, on the sides of the people with the WWF shirt, he's somebody that specializes, he's a cooperative expert, so to speak, that has worked in the agro and forestry cooperative area, and was trying to really highlight or provide advice in terms of the capacity building to both La Islilla cooperative and La Tortuga cooperative. And these two cooperatives represent 20% of both the giant squid and the mahi-mahi fishery in the country. So it is significant and it is symbolic. So some progress is being made. We haven't gotten as far as we wanted to, but an example has been set where other fisheries associations are interested in trying to apply some of the models that they've heard the cooperatives are trying. Now, talking more about research methodologies and the kind of work that we're doing in Peru, what I very personally believe in, and as a team we are applying, is the collaborative fisheries research model. So this was developed by the Virginia Marine Institute, and it's very clearly for us the way forward in trying to work with fishers. And in that sense, to give you a bit more information about what that is about, is that you involve your audience, could be fishers or could be any other kind of community, since you have the idea of what you want to do, so the development of the concept as such. Then the execution, the evaluation and reporting of the work as well. And the point with that is that many times we make the mistake of coming and saying, well, this is what we want to do, and here is how you can help us deliver on this, and that's it. So many times, and particularly fishing communities that have been visited by many academic institutions or by non-governmental organizations, feel used to a certain extent, feel that they have received no benefit, feel that a lot of people have come in and taken information and then left. And so in that sense, what this methodology mainly tries to look at is at valuing both the scientist but also the local community, and giving them equal importance, because one is not better than the other, and they actually depend on each other to make progress in the direction that we want to make. So the stages of this methodology starts with the identification of the problem, and this is really important. And I just want to point out the people in the sunshine, if you want to move, that might be suitable for you. So in the identification of the problem, it's not only the identification of the conservation problem, but it's actually the identification of the problem for the community too. So what is important for these community? What is the challenges that they face? How do we incorporate that into our research or conservation project? So there's an agreement between the researcher and the local community of what the problem that we want to address together is. And in that sense, they really are part of the proposal of this project since the beginning. They are part of deciding how the sampling will be carried out and the development of the field protocol associated to it. So additional to that is the data management, because as I was saying, lots of the frustration in terms of working with fishers is them saying, well, you know, you come, you take this information, we never hear from you again. So what is the benefit to us? So they should have access to the information and be able to use it and keep it for future reference as well. And they should also see the reports that are made from this work, be able to make their own analysis of what these results mean, so then it's credible. And this is important because, for example, I'm working with different NGOs in Peru, specifically taking bycatch as an example. There's a lot of good papers that talk about the problem of bycatch in the country, but because the fishers weren't really part of the research design itself, and neither was the government, they don't validate the results. So even though these papers have been published in peer-reviewed journal and have credibility from a scientific perspective, they don't have credibility from the local perspective or even a governance perspective. So hence something to take into account. And that is directly linked to the dissemination of the information that is gathered in the project. So I want to talk to you about a specific example in that sense. So the fishers of the cooperatives had for 3 years been asking us that they wanted to stop using ice on their vessels and they wanted to start using freezing systems. You know, that was obviously the way to go. It was less weight on the boat, which means less gas consumption, and depending on the energy system that they use, it was more space, and it meant more time flexibility when they go out to fish in terms of coming back and making sure the quality of the product was maintained. That, of course, made sense to everyone. But I must be clear, this was not a real interest for us as conservationists, right? We didn't really see the real conservation benefit of such a project. But nonetheless, because it was such an important issue for the fishers, we decided to put forward a proposal for a national fisheries fund to be able to implement this pilot project. And so we got the fund, $300,000 over 2 years to test 4 different types of freezing systems and to see which one worked best so the fishers could then implement. The only requirement from the fishers' end was that they would need to put forward 30% of the funding for the system. So 70% of the funding for the system would be covered by the grant that we were able to get, and they would just need to put matching funds for 30%. Seemed like a good deal, especially if it was something that was of so much interest to them. But again, reality check from the field, when it actually came to, you know, fishers needing to put the money to be able to buy these systems, suddenly everybody disappeared. All we needed was 4 fishers out of 500 fisher members of both cooperatives to step forward and say, I want to test this. This sounds like a good opportunity. But those that had said they were interested before said, well, we just want to see the results. And then when you decide which is the best system, we'll go and buy it. Which made no sense even for them from a financial perspective. If, you know, to start with, you're going to get 70% of it funded. So this project fell through. We had to return the money. We said, we can't deliver on the project because we kept asking for extensions, but the fishers never committed on their end. So as much as we tried, you know, and to do something for the fishers, by the fishers, that they wanted, that wasn't even our interest, it was them in the end that didn't really put their part of the deal forward. So Sometimes this happens, and well, that's okay. I think at least they know that we are committed to helping them and taking their needs into account. And so we will continue working with them in that sense. So to tell you a bit more about that work that we're doing in Peru with the fisheries. In terms of the cooperatives, as I was mentioning, capacity building of the cooperatives has been an important one over the last few years, and helping them meet the requirements of the legislation. So that also not only includes what I was mentioning before, but it's the legal setup of the cooperative as well, and seeing where are those business opportunities for them. But the one thing I didn't mention as well is helping fishers deal with cases of complaints, formal complaints, legal complaints, and corruption. Because some of these fishers, even though they got their permit in June last year, when they would get into a fishing port, they would find a local authority that said, nah, this permit, I've never heard of it, it's not valid, you know, I'm still gonna take your catch away. Which really usually meant that the officer wanted, you know, a percentage of the gainings from that catch. And that's just the local reality. So it's not only corruption or informality within the fishery system itself, it's within the local government system. So helping fishers say, well, when that happens, this is how you document it, and this is the authority you go to present the case, and so on, is part of the support that we're providing. The other point is related to the value chain. So in that sense, there's quite a few components to take into account. Of course, the first part of it is the extraction side of it, which usually ends up going through a middleman, particularly in terms of the artisanal fishers, that then ends up in a local plant, and that local plant is the one that does the final export. So it's usually the end of the line that gets the biggest financial benefit, and the middleman. The fishers, of course, are the ones that receive the least amount of benefit. But that being said, these are not necessarily really poor fisheries as such. Nonetheless, the idea of the cooperative and the idea of increasing the quality of the products and the idea of them learning from the business model is that they can jump some of these loopholes to get better direct benefit for their product. Because by doing that, by increasing their income as well, then the catch can be reduced too. So going back to the case of the anchoveta industrial fisheries, I was saying that it's mostly used for fish oil or fish feed, for example. And there's lots of push from different organizations at trying to promote more human consumption of the anchoveta. And the reason for that is because if we directly consume the anchoveta, it increases the value of it, so the catch can be reduced, and therefore makes it even more sustainable. But because we like more expensive products like salmon, for example, and then there's lots of anchoveta that is caught to then be sent to the salmon fish farms that we then end up eating. So there's a role to play as consumers as well. I mentioned to you that one of the requirements that the cooperatives have is registering their catch in an electronic system. This is something I really want to highlight because traceability is a key component to be able to make fisheries more sustainable. And not only fisheries, but different kinds of products. We see traceability more and more in forestry products. We see them even in coffee production. And in the case of fisheries, it's no exception. So for example, the US market is getting more stringent in terms of export fisheries needing to demonstrate that their catch doesn't come from illegal sources. And the only way to do that is through these traceability systems. Some folks call this blockchain systems, and it is linked to blockchain, but it's not only about blockchain. In any case, where we're at as WWF at this point is that we've developed an application that has different users for it, and it's already being tested in the cooperatives. So take my case. So I bought this boat. I'm really happy. I hire a crew to go fishing. And so when the boat is going to disembark and going to leave port, I register it in. So I register myself as boat owner. I register the vessel, and I register the crew, and say the crew is leaving today. Then the crew on board also have users on the app, and particularly the captain of the crew, to say where he went fishing, how much he caught, or she if it were the case, and then coming back to the disembarkment port. At the disembarkment port, there's another user for the port to register how much catch and of what species is offloaded on the port. Now this is being linked on some systems, for example, to the weights and cameras. So it's less manual. So for example, when a box of fish goes on the weight automatically links to the application and registers the information. So that way you reduce the human handling and therefore the error of the information. Also you have cameras when the boats arrive and when the transport leaves, so you can see that what is reported was actually what went through that port that day. And so the idea of traceability is that you have a better information of how much is actually fished, where it's fished, how it's fished, if there was bycatch or not as well. That should also be reported on the application. Then when it got to port until the point of it being sold. That's where we are at this point. We haven't gotten to the plants and export side of things, but in the end, the idea is that you as final consumer and responsible consumer, you will be able to go and buy a fish, know where it's from, where it was caught, and by who. And so you know if it's sustainable or not. So this is where the user, in this case Juan, would register the information from the trip, the point of sale after the product is weighed, how much actually arrived into port, and then this is where the authority comes in. So Produce, which is the Ministry of Production that oversees fisheries in Peru, is really interested in this system and linking it to the satellite tracking system that they are requiring fishers to use. So then the information, they can validate the information at different points, and it helps increase fiscalization or vigilance of the process. And then this would be the point of exports, to which we haven't gotten yet to date. But if you look it up on Google, on the Google store or the Samsung store, you can already find the application in case you're interested. So I was telling you in the beginning that I work on bycatch, and that is one of the issues that we're also working on in Peru. So we have two main areas. One focused on fisheries, the other focused on endangered species conservation, but they're both directly linked because incidental take in fisheries is the main threat to the protected species. So that is a whole other talk, so I'm not going to dive into it in depth. Happy to talk about it over afterwards if you are interested, but I just want to give you an oversight of what this entails and how we apply the CFR or collaborative fisheries research methodology to that piece of work too. And one is that we work with technology. Currently, we're testing LED devices, such as the one you see in the picture, which emits a LED light to detract turtles from being entangled in gill nets. And it also seems to have benefits to reduce dolphin bycatch as well, and shark bycatch too. So that is working really well. The main challenge we're facing now is that it's not locally available in Peru. So we want to see if we can develop some local models, starting with local assembly through some women associations. Then there's pingers, which are similar, but they are acoustic deterrents, and they work better for cetaceans. So for example, there's some fisheries up north in a place called Los Órganos that have a lot of interaction with whales. And because a whale is not like a dolphin or a turtle that will get entangled in the net and die, the whale will take the net with it. So the fishers loses their whole catch. And it's a very painful and long death for the whale that can last between 6 months to a year, because basically they get strangled in the net over time. So these pingers have worked really well in reducing that problem, and now in some ports where they're being tested, the fishers that don't have them don't go out to fish. And so they are asking for these the pingers to to test them in their nets, because each net can cost up to $3,000. So it's a significant loss if during the whale season they lose their gear. So we work in capacity building with artisanal fishers and with industrial fishers as well, so they can identify the species and they can report bycatch when it happens. They also are sending us videos of when this happens, like, for example, the picture you see on screen of a turtle being entangled in a net. Gill nets are the biggest problem, and gill nets are the fishing nets. They receive that name because they catch fish by gills, and depending on the mesh size is the species that get entangled. And some of the gill nets, at least in the case of Peru, can be 200 meters long. In the case of Pakistan, they can be 2 kilometers long. So you can imagine the number of animals that get caught, especially if it's passive gear, which means they leave it overnight and they come and pick it up the next day, because the more time the net is in the water, the more chances of catching A, more animals, and B, of these animals dying in the net before they can be liberated. In the picture, you see a leatherback turtle. The Eastern Pacific leatherback turtle is critically endangered. Its population has reduced by 90% over the last 30 years. And before I worked for WWF, I worked for a local NGO in Costa Rica in La Baulas National Park. Baula is leatherback in Costa Rican Spanish, because they changed name per country. And to give you an idea of the scale of the bycatch issue for this particular population, there were more bycaught turtles reported in Peru last year than there were turtles nesting in La Baulas National Park, that is the indicator species. In La Baulas, in the 80s, there were thousands of turtles of leatherbacks nesting. Last year, well, this season, the last I heard, there were 8. Last year there were 22, and there were 26 leatherbacks reported as bycaught in the Peruvian gillnet fisheries. So protecting marine species is, it crosses borders, and it really requires collaboration between countries, and it can't be addressed by one country alone, because to take the specific example of leatherbacks, they have been protected in in Costa Rica and in Mexico, where their other nesting sites are for years, from egg consumption, which used to be the previous main threat. But now the problem is that they're getting caught in their fishing, in fishing grounds, in their feeding grounds. Okay, so in summary, a short video that tells you more about what we do. En el programa marino de WWF trabajamos en 2 áreas principales. Una, que es las pesquerías, en las más importantes del país, que son anchoveta, perico y pota. Y la otra, que es la biodiversidad marina, que es para la conservación de los cetáceos, las tortugas marinas y los tiburones.
La pesquería de anchoveta es la principal pesquería del Perú. Genera trabajo para muchas personas y además es un recurso altamente nutritivo. Es por eso que WWF busca promover la sostenibilidad de esta pesquería y reducir su impacto en el ecosistema.
La pota y perico sustentan la primera y segunda pesquería artesanal en el Perú. Esa pesquería sustenta una gran cadena productiva de exportación y, a pesar de esto, se presentan una serie de deficiencias en las cuales se debe mejorar. En ese sentido, venimos trabajando con el proyecto de mejoramiento pesquero para poder alcanzar la sostenibilidad de ambas pesquerías.
Un problema importante es que no se conoce el origen de los productos pesqueros, ni de los actores que participan en la cadena. Es por ello que WWF ha implementado un sistema de trazabilidad digital que recorra la ruta del pescado, desde el pescador al consumidor final.
Hace 5 años, WWF viene apoyando en el proceso de formalización de la pesquería artesanal, trabajando con 2 cooperativas pesqueras, tanto la Islilla como la Tortuga. Junto con los pescadores hemos tenido que superar diferentes obstáculos, pero ellos han podido lograr este primer objetivo, que es su formalización pesquera.
WWF promueve el trabajo en conjunto y coordinado con las diferentes instituciones del Estado y, a su vez, genera espacios de diálogos y participación ciudadana en las cuales se puedan tomar medidas y acciones para poder reducir esta problemática.
En el Perú tenemos 5 de las 7 especies de tortugas marinas que habitan en el mundo. La principal amenaza para esas especies en el país es la interacción con las artes de pesca. Por eso, trabajamos desarrollando nuevas tecnologías para poder reducir la captura incidental en las principales pesquerías.
Estamos desarrollando una bitácora de pesca electrónica en alianza con las empresas para monitorear la captura incidental de especies protegidas como el delfín, y campañas de sensibilización y capacitaciones a los tripulantes de las embarcaciones para que sepan la importancia de conservar estas especies y además buenas prácticas para liberarlas.
En WWF trabajamos la educación ambiental a través de 3 temas principales: promoviendo la conservación de especies protegidas, disminuyendo la contaminación marina y promoviendo el consumo y la pesca responsable. Esto lo hacemos a través de juegos, talleres, festivales en las comunidades y en alianza con los colegios de cada comunidad.
Únete a WWF por la sostenibilidad del mar peruano. So, let's talk about lessons learned. As I was saying, mainly in our eyes, it's about relationships. And for example, when some projects end, there's no more funding to continue to work with fishermen. Because of the relationships that have been built, the engagement continues. And so sometimes, without funds, we go and visit these communities to keep that relationship ongoing and keep the fishermen committed and motivated to continue participating. For example, in bycatch reduction is a very clear one. To value local knowledge and for fishers to really feel that the information they are providing is being considered is extremely important. So I gave you the example of the freezing on board system and how that didn't work out. But the fact that the fishers saw us really try and put this forward and make it happen is still valued by them. They're always like, oh, you know, we're sorry it didn't work out and whatnot. But they continue to be engaged in working with us on other projects. And I'm sure we'll find others to support them as well. And in that sense, for those needs to be considered within the project is extremely important. As I was saying in the beginning, you can have a very nice conservation objective, but if you take the example of bycatch, for example, with these technologies that we are using, if the fishers find it not useful and too complicated, they won't implement it. And nobody's there because of this lack of governance and vigilance to really see that implementation happening. But if they see the benefits, like in the case of whale entanglement being reduced, then they themselves are asking for the technology. And that's a great basis to be able to move forward. Because also, when a project doesn't work, the information gets disseminated very quickly amongst the local community, and sometimes years go by before they open up again. And in the same way, when things work, then other communities find out and are reaching out because they want to replicate what has been achieved. In that sense, one thing that has been lacking in Peru, or was lacking for a very long time, and is something that we're trying to help along with the other organizations, is creating these spaces where government can engage directly with the fishing communities, and hence the Fisheries Forum that is mentioned in the video. So once a month, we meet with a different topic of relevance for the sector. So the government and industrial and artisanal actors have an opportunity to exchange. So there are no hidden agendas. There's not necessarily specific actions that derive from that discussion, but just the fact to have that open space of dialogue has really helped strengthen relationships, and then for certain groups to be able to move forward on actions that they decide based on what happened in that space. And we are trying to look into creating more of those kinds of spaces in other sectors, therefore. So finally, as I also said in the beginning, once a project ends, once and research finishes, once there is interest change, be it the sector that it may be, everybody leaves, and the only ones that are left behind are the communities. That's why the communities are your most important audience. They are the ones you need to convince of why this is important and how it benefits them. So listening to them and their needs and taking that into account and making that part of the design and the delivery and the reporting of your project is what's really going to guarantee. Forget the outcomes of the project itself. I mean, in good theory, we're all in this because we want to see long-term changes in conservation. And so, for example, and I'll close with this. When talking about the issue of waste management, which is one that we're looking into and that is linked to my PhD research, fishers have started realizing, because one of the problems in Peruvian fisheries is that they throw everything at sea. So their food waste, their discards from the activity, motor oil, you name it, everything ends up in the ocean. And some communities on their own have started realizing the impacts of that and making efforts to collect their trash and bring it back to port. Now the problem is more on the government side. Well, what do you do with this waste once the fishers bring it back to port? Which is a huge lack in Peru because there's only 8 landfills in the whole country. So the waste problem at a national level is a big one. But this is an initiative that came from the fishers themselves, and that is more motivating than anything else. Once you get champions in the community, that's where you can see real change happening on its own. Because the idea, my personal perspective, is that NGOs should not exist. I mean, in the end, we should all have an exit strategy so the NGOs, or environmental NGOs specifically, are not needed, because conservation is embedded in the way we produce, in the way we consume, in the way we govern. And so in that sense, our vision is, of course, for future generations to be able to continue to fish. We're not against fishing, but that fishing should be carried out in a sustainable way. And for us, sustainability includes not only the environmental component, but also the economic and the social component too. And this is who we do it for. So with that, I want to thank you very much.